Welcome to Storytime Digital Media. I'm your host, Megan Fox, and I'm here with Kevin DuJan, and we are talking about the Tinley Park low-income housing scandal that is going on in Tinley Park, Illinois. And today, we have some breaking news about more resignations coming from the Village of Tinley Park. Just last week, Michael Mertens, who's the Assistant Planning Director, who worked very closely with Amy Connolly, has resigned. There's some question about where he actually lives. He has two residences, one of which is in Chicago and one of which is in Tinley. He claims he wants to spend more time in Chicago, and so he wants out. And then today, we got the rumor mill is going that Trustee Bernard Brady is also stepping down this week. So, Kevin, what do you make of all the sudden resignations?
Well, this is really interesting, Megan, because this Bernard Brady, and so he was a trustee that was appointed, I believe, when someone else had left. And this Bernard Brady guy at the February 2nd meeting, the first board meeting that, 1,000 citizens came out to attend this meeting. Megan, do you remember how badly he behaved at this meeting? He was slumped in his chair like he had no bones, just slumped back like a Muppet. And he was making faces at people. And, at this last meeting on February 22nd, the one they had at Andrew High School, he was behaving badly there, too. When Trustee Panito was speaking, he was making faces, and he got into a little back and forth with Panito. So apparently a lot of people know this Bernard Brady, and they say he's a nice person or whatever, but I think his behavior has been shameful in public. And Megan, these trustees, people were talking about this on Facebook today, they appear to make between $16,000 or $19,000 a year to be a trustee. So Megan, that's not enough for them to not have other jobs. This Bernard Brady, he's an accountant. Panito's an attorney. Vandenberg is a mortician. They all have regular day jobs. But however, $16,000 to $19,000 a year extra, that's a lot of money. For a lot of people I know, that's their mortgage for a year. That's more than a year of rent plus utilities. That's money that people live on. And he's getting this money, but yet laying back in his chair and making faces at the public and behaving rudely. I have a very low opinion of him. So him resigning, I think, is a good thing based on his behavior, the way that he conducts himself during meetings. But Megan, I have to say, he is the least worst of bad board members. There's 3 bad board members, which was Bernard Brady, Brian Maher, and then the worst one, which is that TJ or BJ Brady. So we have, or Grady.
Grady.
You see, we have a Brady and we have a Grady. So him resigning is a good thing because it makes it less confusing in terms of all these rhyming words. But that the one who I wanted to resign was that terrible TJ Grady, but he has decided to keep taking his $16,000 or $19,000 coming to board meetings. Mayor Seaman also seems to get about $25,000 a year to be the mayor. So he's someone else that should resign. But what do you think of this Bernard Brady?
I think that I agree with you. The first meeting I was at that I saw his behavior, I thought it was pretty insulting to people, slouching in his chair, hiding behind his computer screen, being flippant with people. I thought it was, he was in the wrong job. If he doesn't want to be questioned, he should not be a village trustee. That's the end of the story. He may be a really nice guy, and he may be really fun to barbecue with, and he may be a good storyteller or whatever it is. That I've heard from people who know Bernard Brady, and they like him very much. I think, though, that he was in the wrong job. And I think that it's good that he's gone, but it doesn't always figure. It's never the one you want. It's always the one who has somewhat of a conscience. And I think that he resigned because he saw what was coming, or maybe this just wasn't fun for him anymore. But the ones we really need to go are TJ Grady and Brian Maher, who calls women in the community ridiculous. I mean, that was really offensive to me, him calling Beth one of the women who came to say, you know, that why won't you build a strip club then? Let's build a strip club since you say you can't stop anything in the town. If it meets code, let's build a strip club. And he said, oh, now you're being ridiculous. Well, it's not ridiculous. It's a good question. If you're saying that you can build anything in the town of Tinley as long as it meets precise requirements of the code, well, then how could you turn down a strip club? And yet Brian Maher said that it was ridiculous. So, you know, people like that really need to go. Bernie Brady offended me the least. I've seen other trustees make faces at the public before. It's not new. They get, you know, he felt the heat. Maybe it was the first time he was ever under that much scrutiny, and maybe he didn't react very well. I thought he kind of pulled himself together in later meetings, but at least better than TJ Grady, you know, who yells at people and calls them names in the middle of a board meeting. So it's never the ones you want, but I'm glad that he's going. I think that he wasn't cut out for it.
Well, and one thing that should be noted is, so within the last week or so, I think it was on the 22nd, on February 22nd, the village board was served with a lawsuit. And so they're being sued in Chancery Court, Cook County Circuit Court Chancery Division. They're being sued for that illegal zoning code change. And this is the one that Amy Connolly and Thomas Melody, they pulled a bunch of dirty tricks with dirty strings, string pulling, to get this through, that Buckeye needed to have that zoning code changed and tampered with to have the commercial required, street level commercial required, had to be deleted from the zoning code in order for Buckeye to get its way in to be able to build what it wanted to build, and it had to be replaced with street level commercial permitted. But however, Amy Connolly, she had put in all the documents that were published for the public in the newspaper. She had said it was going to be changed to street level commercial allowed. So they didn't handle this zoning code change correctly. They bungled it, they fumbled it, they bumbled it. And turning on a light bulb and chasing out all the cockroaches, that's what this lawsuit basically has done. That they were hit with this lawsuit. The lawsuit is asking a judge to take a look at what was done with the zoning code change and the tampering done to it. And the judge is going to void that zoning code change, and that's going to make the whole Buckeye project just collapse into dust, because it's going to revert the code back to saying street level commercial required, because that'll be back in the code the way it should be without the tampering of Amy Connolly and Thomas Melody from Kleinthorpe Jenkins that were on Buckeye's side doing this against the wishes of the village. Well, once that happens and Buckeye just collapses into ruin, I think that people like Bernie Brady see the writing on the wall. Just like those 7 planning commission members. Hey, do you remember those people? That was last month in February. That was the rats jumping off the ship. These 7 commissioners for the planning commission. You had Rita Walker and Art Pierce, William Reedy, Gina Miller, Tom Mahoney, Jeff Ficcaro, and Bob McClellan. You know, these fools all decided to leave the planning commission once they realized that they messed up. And, you know, they didn't catch what Amy Connolly and Thomas Melody were doing. They should have, because they had to approve the tampering with the zoning code. But none of these idiots had any idea what was going on. And then when they realized that they were in trouble and that people were looking at what they had been doing, they all went racing for the exits, pushing each other out of the way to try to get out of the building first. You know, there were 9 members on this planning commission, and 7 of them went jumping off the ship like rats. There's 2 people that are still on, but who knows, maybe they have resigned. You know, I put in a FOIA request to see who else has resigned, because they didn't announce any of these 7 ones. It was just all behind the scenes, and if you didn't FOIA for it, you didn't know. Today, I don't know how people figured out that Bernie Brady resigned. I know that there were supposed to be meetings today that Bernie Brady was supposed to be at, and he didn't show up. And then I think someone let it slip that he had resigned. So he resigned.
I'm expecting to get confirmation on that sometime tomorrow, I would think. But right now it is just hearsay that he is resigning because he didn't show up for his meeting that he chairs. So we'll see. We'll probably know for sure tomorrow. So there's Mike Mertens.
Yeah, this guy resigned. It was announced in the paper yesterday. Southtown wrote about it, but he actually turned in his resignation on March 24th. Now that's an interesting date, isn't it? Because March 22nd, that was the big meeting at Andrew High School where that day the village got served with the lawsuit. And this Mike Mertens, to my knowledge, he was not named in the lawsuit. I believe just Amy Connolly and Thomas Melody, then all the board members. I don't even know if the village manager was named.
I don't think he was, but tell people about this article because it really was ridiculous how they went out of their way to make it sound like it had nothing at all to do with the scandal that's happening at the village. Tell about the relation between Pravda and, the old Soviet newspapers.
Yeah, so, for those of us old enough to remember the Soviet Union, Megan and I were both in high school in the early 90s. And so that's what every history class and every political class would always be about, the Cold War and the Soviets. And I had a teacher who had written up on the wall, how teachers decorate the classroom with all kind of different stuff. And she had a display that said, "There is no news in the truth and no truth in the news." Because in the Soviet Union, according to my teacher, she said that there were two newspapers. One was called Iskra and one was called Pravda. And Iskra meant the news, and Pravda meant the truth, or maybe it's vice versa. I don't speak Russian, but and it's been a long time. But it was always ironic to her that one of the newspapers was called The News and the other one was called The Truth. But there was actually no truth in the news or news in the truth because it was just all propaganda. And it's shocking that in the year 2016 here in the United States, our media is like that now here because it is just propaganda. So these local papers, especially this Daily Southtown, the Orland Park Prairie, the Tinley Park Junction, none of them ever want to say anything negative about government. So this reporter, Mike Nolan in the Southtown, he writes up a thing about Mike Mertens leaving his position as village manager, village assistant manager rather. And if you read the article, it's like he goes out of his way, like he is some kind of a Bulgarian contortionist at the circus who doesn't want to touch anything related to scandal. So he's writing up this thing of Mike Mertens leaving, but leaving out all the things that are interesting and relevant. So if I had written this instead of Mike Nolan, I would have noted that this resignation is very suspicious in its timing because it comes just 2 days after the village is sued for those illegal zoning code changes and all the shenanigans related to Buckeye. So do you mean to tell me that this is just a mere coincidence that suddenly Mike Mertens, who by the way has been a village employee since 1998, he has been the village assistant manager for the last 13 years, and this is interesting, Megan, because, okay, so he's been the village assistant manager for 13 years. It is very clear to anyone who has been watching any of this that the current village manager, what is his name, David Niemeyer?
David Niemeyer.
David Niemeyer. Now, this clown has been the village manager or some kind of position similar to that at many villages all around. He never stays in his job long. At the February 22nd meeting, there were people who came forward with his performance reviews from these other villages that he worked at. And it was terrible, terrible reviews everywhere, that he's bad at his job, that he causes problems wherever he is. So then he leaves one place like a plague of locusts and goes somewhere else. So this guy very clearly is not going to be working for Tinley Park for much longer because the people really want him to be fired.
And you're talking about David Niemeyer, not Michael Mertens.
I'm talking about David Niemeyer, correct. And so my point is, in terms of Mike Mertens, if this guy has been the assistant village manager for 13 years, and no one really talks about him with anything, like I had to keep looking up his name because people don't ever mention it. I see him at these meetings, but he has never spoken. But people have always been focused on this David Niemeyer. Well, if you're the assistant and your boss, the village manager, is clearly going to be tossed out on his butt pretty soon and fired, why would you leave your job, Megan? Why would you leave the assistant job?
That's a good question because he would have been in line to get that job most likely.
And at least to be the interim village manager until they found someone better. But if they were so desperate they had that David Niemeyer that nobody wanted, don't you think that this would be a very likely that Mike Mertens would get to be village manager? So I think there's something else here. And it's very, very lightly touched on here by Mike Nolan. Like Mike Nolan just dropped a clue what the real issue may be. What I think is possible, Mike Mertens admits that he has a home in Tinley Park, but then he also has a place in Chicago itself with his wife. And his wife apparently is the vice president of something or another. And so she works in the city. What do you want to suspect? That there might be some kind of an issue here with his residency?
Oh, absolutely. He is supposed to, as the assistant manager, he's supposed to live within the city limits. And now he has a company car, okay? So he has a village vehicle, which means that the village pays for his mileage, and I believe they even pay for his gas. Now that I'm not quite sure about, but I heard people were saying that village employees fill up when they're on the job on the village. If he is driving from Tinley Park to Chicago instead of Tinley Park to Tinley Park when he goes home at night, that is costing the taxpayers of Tinley a whole lot more than it would for someone who is local. So he's like keeping his address in Tinley just so he can have his job. But I think he's really living in Chicago. I think that's what we're going to find. Now I know that the excavator, Michael Glotz, he's FOIAing those mileage records, and he's going to find out where Mike Mertens has been going. It's only a matter of time to find out how many miles he's been putting on his car every day.
And this matters because, we don't know any of this. This is just speculation. But this is just, when people come across these clues, you have to start to wonder things because the media doesn't do this for people anymore. Mike Nolan is not doing this. Mike Nolan doesn't want to be Woodward or Bernstein looking into what the government is doing because the media now is in the business of just promoting the government and doing what the government wants. But here's my idea. So Mike Mertens claims in the Southtown article, he says he owns a place in Tinley Park and he owns a place in Chicago. But the article doesn't say that he actually lives in Tinley Park. I wonder if he rents out the place he has in Tinley Park, but then just lives in Chicago with his wife. And now, because there's all this scrutiny, I wonder if he's thinking, oh man, I have to race for the door before they figure out that I haven't been living in the village. Because if you look at things that Amy Connolly said, she said that she hated having to live in Tinley Park itself to be able to work for the village. So there's a requirement, it seems, for these high-ranking village employees to actually live in the village. And I wonder if Mike Mertens has just been claiming he lives in the village, but has really been in Chicago the whole time. And the way you'd be able to prove it is if he has been renting out the place that he has in Tinley Park. I wonder if that has been happening.
Yeah, it's a very good question. If you could find a picture of David Niemeyer, I have some of his letters of reprimand, and some of this stuff is just too good not to share. It's just crazy that the Village of Tinley Park has done such a poor job of vetting employees. First, we have this Amy Connolly who clearly hates the suburbs, hates everything to do with the suburbs, and doesn't want any commercial business in Tinley because she's chasing them away left and right. So they did a terrible job finding a planning director. And now the village manager, David Niemeyer, all it takes is one, FOIA request that Michael Glotz did, and he found, let's see, this comes from the Village of Oak Brook. And the Village of Oak Brook has a written reprimand for David Niemeyer. And it says, the board understands that the village's 2 Northern Illinois University interns were part of the 5-member Oak Brook delegation that attended the conference at village expense. Section 5.14 of the Oak Brook Personnel Manual provides that only full-time village employees shall attend professional seminars at village expense. Further, the accommodations selected for the village delegation were not appropriate and should have been the subject of a more thorough analysis and consideration. Finally, under the personnel manual, the village manager is charged with the final approval of all village employee attendance at professional seminars at village expense. Based on the circumstance of this particular conference, it appears that the approval process going forward must be far more rigorous and standardized. So here we have David Niemeyer, while he was the acting village manager of Oak Brook, taking interns to an expensive, fancy conference and putting them up in a fancy hotel, which was against the rules. And so he got caught, and a written letter of reprimand was put in his file. So I think this is really interesting too, Kevin, because we've come across these conferences before that are like total junkets and wasting of money. The Orland Park Library was always doing this, sending people to conferences where they would have $700 hotel rooms and $300 steak dinners. And they never brought anything back that they learned about or did anything, they didn't share any learnings or anything useful. And here we have a city of Oak Brook which appears to be very concerned about spending the village's money. And their village manager, David Niemeyer, clearly was just one of these people who loves to do that. Don't you find that interesting?
Well, I find it incredibly interesting. With the Orland Park Public Library example, they've just done it again. They sent 2 people to San Francisco, to have a wonderful time at huge taxpayer expense, when the conference that they went to attend was some kind of virtual services conference. So if it's all about virtual, why the hell couldn't they have just done it at their computers at their desk and done online learning? Why do you need to go to San Francisco to do this stuff?
David Niemeyer goes and takes interns to some conference that he wasn't supposed to take them to, and puts them up at a hotel and spends a bunch of money on them.
The days of going off to these trips, to take these trips different places, and you claim that you're learning things, that really should be over in this age of YouTube and online learning. People are no longer going to expensive college campuses and paying the room and board because they can do distance learning from their computers in their home. They can do online learning. People are getting online degrees. It is time for these public employees to join the 21st century already in progress. It is inappropriate to be going to these conferences, first of all, and wasting all this public money, but to be taking interns, for crying out loud, how long has it been since the 1990s, late 1990s? Don't public officials know to stop messing around with interns at this point?
I want to know, what did these interns look like? Were these male interns? Were they young interns?
Right.
Were they blonde interns? What kind of interns was David Niemeyer taking to hotels?
Taking to hotels, it's just sick and inappropriate. And this is another guy too, that his behavior at these board meetings, I think, is poor. At the February 22nd meeting, the last one that was held at Andrew High School, they had him and they had that Mike Mertens and they had some other guy from village management sitting at what looked like the children's table at Thanksgiving or Easter dinner. You know how they have that, Megan, where all the adults sit at one table and the kids are off at the kids' table?
Yes, and as a kid, you spend your whole life trying to figure out what do you have to do to get to the adult table.
So yeah, the board and the mayor and the clerk, they were all at the adult table, and Niemeyer and this Mike Mertens, they were off at the children's table. And that's where Amy Connolly would typically sit, but she's been on this mysterious administrative leave. Why isn't she resigning? This Mike Mertens, he had sense enough to know, oh shoot, they're going to start looking into bad things I've been doing. I suddenly want to spend more time in Chicago with my wife. So I have to resign now. Why isn't Amy Connolly resigning to go spend more time in Detroit, Michigan, or whatever she's going to do after this?
Do you want to hear some more from David Niemeyer's reprimand?
Yeah, please do.
So there's a section here where the village board members get to pipe up with what they think. And one of them says, "No, I do not think Dave does a good job of keeping the board informed on the president's activities. Maybe there should be a public calendar accessible by all trustees of the village president's activities. David has given the village president advice on his next election. I was there and I heard him. Yes, I agree with Dave that improving board presentation needs improvement." Then Niemeyer puts a note in here denying that he ever gave this person election advice, but this board member says he was there and he heard him. Then further down on planning, Dave should take professional development on strategic planning. Well, shouldn't he have already had that education before he became a manager of an entire village? And then now this is really amazing, under financial management budget, tell me if this doesn't raise a red flag. A master plan for sports core and a viable solution to make it more profitable is sorely needed. Oh, so David Niemeyer is a manager over things that are not profitable. Gee, doesn't that sound familiar?
And okay, so this is interesting too. So then at that February 22nd meeting, the last one that they had, village board meeting that was at the Andrew High School, somebody was asking about, I think it was Michael Glotz, the excavator. He's called the excavator because he's been digging up all these great finds through FOIA and other research. He's doing a hell of a job. Well, I think it was him that asked the question of, haven't any of you Googled this David Niemeyer? How come I was able to find this in just like a week? And did you know about his bad performance reviews? And the board just looked like blank. They just were staring forward, and they said, oh, we don't know. I don't know. We're not allowed to Google. We can't ask those things. So they apparently never thought, while they were hiring these people, these new village managers, they didn't even think to FOIA the other villages, or I don't even think they would need to FOIA. They could just ask.
They just ask? I mean, listen to this. Listen to how awful this sounds. I think Dave needs a better understanding of the sports core non-golf operation, and specifically where and why we lose money, and what operating changes can be made to stop the bleed. He allows Trey to continue presenting info that does not accurately reflect what's going on. Dave is disconnected from understanding the sports core issues. I have seen letters of reprimand. This one is intense.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing you need to keep in mind, too, is that in these situations, people typically don't want to put anything down on paper. And unless you are doing a really horrible job, to the point where there's this like a psychological threshold is breached, where suddenly like you're no longer wanting to be nice. Too many people want to be nice all the time and not write anything down or be politically correct or whatever. But there is a point where someone becomes so bad at their job that all of that goes out the window, and then they just are honest.
Listen to this. Listen to execution of policy. This will blow your mind. Dave has not done a good job with keeping the board in compliance of the village code and state requirements of reviewing and approving closed minutes. The violation is clear, inexcusable, and intolerable. It would be different if it were only a few items that had been overlooked, but dating back 2 years, no, there is no excuse. How about that?
So it sounds like he's breaking the law by not doing some of these things correctly. Is that right?
Sounds like this is about the OMA, that he did not do a good job keeping the board in compliance of the village code and state requirements, that would be the Open Meetings Act, of reviewing and approving closed minutes. So again, we're back to Open Meetings Act violations with this guy.
And, it should be noted, since February 2nd, almost every meeting that the village has had some sort of Open Meetings Act violation happen. The only ones that it appears that there were no violations was just the March 1st meeting appeared to have no violations. That was the one that they had at the convention center. But every other meeting, they have had violations either for trying to restrict people's speech. At the March 22nd meeting that they just had, both the mayor and also Trustee Maher were telling people that they weren't allowed to speak about things that could damage or harm the village.
Well, Michael Gloss was trying to read through these letters, and they stopped him. He was unable to get this far. This is why we've never heard this before.
Because they told him to stop. Yeah. They told him that they don't want him talking about this. And then, Megan, you know what else they pulled? They suddenly decided that the building had to close. But that was not posted on the agenda of, the meeting starts at 8 o'clock and the meeting has to end at a certain time. No, they waited until Mike Glotz started talking about David Niemeyer and these performance reviews, and then the mayor suddenly started saying, oh, well, public comment has to end now because the high school wants to close the building. Everyone wants to go home and go to sleep. We have to stop the meeting now. I don't believe that the Open Meetings Act allows for that, because the village has no rule saying how long public comment could go on for, or how much time each person could have to speak. So suddenly in the middle of public comment, you can't suddenly say that we have to cut short before everyone has a chance to speak because the building has to close. I don't see that in the Open Meetings Act anywhere allowing them to do that.
Okay, so you're going to love this. This is great. On a personal level, I'm not sure of what steps were taken to acquire new skills. Dave does not have good presentation skills. I'm not sure if he knows what good presentation skills are. Oh, these people don't like him at all. And I like his response. His response is very funny. This is the first time I've ever heard this in Oak Brook or in my career. If this relates to use of PowerPoint presentations, I would not call myself an expert in this, but can do a basic presentation and will look for more staff training on this. Oh, Lord. Oh, this guy is clueless. Clearly, he just doesn't give good presentations, but he's like, I've never heard that before. It's very funny.
To me, Megan, he seems to be a clueless bumbler. I don't see him as being an evil mastermind behind anything. So what I think happens, like the more I look at these people, and even with that Mike Mertens, that guy was running his own, whatever you want to call it, his own little scheme involving where the heck he actually lived. So he looked like he was pretty invested in those shenanigans. But he doesn't seem like he's an evil individual too. So the stuff that Amy was up to and that Thomas Melody from Clanthorpe Jenkins were up to in helping Buckeye get what it wanted against what the people actually wanted, I think that David Niemeyer and this Mike Mertens seemed that they were just oblivious and clueless.
Well, here's some evidence to that. So we've always said that Amy had she did not have proper supervision. Well, under this professional and office development on his letter of reprimand, one of the board members says, notice Dave's comment, we will schedule computer training as needed. Dave does not know what computer training is needed because he doesn't know the staff's proficiency levels of the various software. This is in strong need of attention. This is part of providing good leadership. So they're saying that he is a bad leader, that he does not do good leadership because he does not understand what his staff is actually capable of. So it just goes to further the narrative that he was not paying attention to Tinley Park staff either.
And that appears to have let Amy Connolly just run wild and do whatever Amy Connolly wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that set the stage for Amy to be doing things with Buckeye. In the emails between David Petroni and Amy Connolly, or that Zach Crafton from Buckeye and Amy Connolly, to me, it always felt like she was responding to them like they were her boss, like that David Petroni was her boss. And so maybe in the absence of actual leadership from this David Niemeyer, maybe she just responded to this Petroni guy, and who came in, and he probably saw this leadership vacuum, Megan. Like, this guy tried to get his stuff built, in New Lenox, and he tried in Oak Lawn. And this David Niemeyer, he had left from Oak Lawn however long ago. But Oak Lawn told Buckeye and Petroni no. New Lenox told Buckeye and Petroni no. But maybe Petroni realized that this Niemeyer was such a weak individual in his position, and if he could influence Amy Connolly and get away with it, I think that David Petroni was smart enough to see this as an opportunity. This man's ignorance and foolishness, Niemeyer's, and his incompetence, I think opened the door to Buckeye.
I think it's very possible. I mean, clearly, from the very beginning, everybody has said that the village planning department seems to be operating with no leadership, with no oversight, and that Amy Connolly is running it like her little fiefdom. When I spoke to that architect, to Gabriel Garcia, he told me that she was the gatekeeper. You couldn't get in the door in Tinley unless you got past Amy Connolly. Well, that's not the way other villages work. He told me specifically when he went to the town of New Lenox, he was just so thrilled with how professional they were and how his very first meeting, even an informal meeting, he met with every department head in the village, and they were there to say, how can we work with you? How can we bring you to our village? How can we help you with this development? In Amy Connolly's case, she was the only one you would meet with. She was the only one, and she had the say, yes or no, to whether or not your plans were going to get even get in the door. And I think it's a major failure on the part of David Niemeyer, who was supposed to be her supervisor, that he was allowing that to happen. So he either wanted her to do that, or he had no idea she was doing that because he wasn't properly supervising her.
Oh, and Megan, when I was out delivering door hangers, citizens of Tinley Park, they had a whole mess of door hangers that had to be delivered, 12,000 of them. So I took a bunch and I walked neighborhoods and I was passing them out, and I talked to quite a few people who said that it was known around town that Amy Connolly, if she didn't like you, she would look for different codes that she could claim that you were violating and report you for them. So she really abused her position in that planning department by going around and punishing neighbors she didn't like. You know, and then here someone found a Google picture of her house that had her trash cans in the wrong place. That would be a violation that she should have been written up for. You know, not putting her garbage cans
on that Suburbia site when she was posting all day when she was supposed to be working, but she was on this like social media for village planners talking about how they do their jobs and asking questions about how does she do her job right. She had posted several things about her next door neighbors right next to her and how she was keeping a list of all their code violations. You know, this was not a person who, I mean, this is not somebody you really want to live next door to.
Oh no, she seemed like a bad neighbor as well as being bad at her job as the planning director. But the ultimate responsibility, the buck has to stop somewhere. And so this David Niemeyer as the village manager, I believe he is up for reappointment again on May 1st. May 1st, I think, is a day that the village has to vote to approve the appointments of a lot of these high-ranking village officials. And David Niemeyer needs to be out of a job on May 1st. So he needs to follow his assistant, Mike Mertens, out the door and resign before then, or he needs to be fired. And I believe that TJ Grady, or some people call him BJ Grady, he needs to be out the door with his banker's box too. Megan, I love that thing that Matt Coughlin, what he said at that March 22nd meeting, where Matt Coughlin said, earn your keep or pack your bags. Remember that?
Yep. And yeah, he's right. And, I think he really laid down the gauntlet that night and let them know how it was going to be from here on out. You're either going to do the work, the job that we have hired you to do, and you're going to do it well, or pack your stuff and get out, because nobody's going to put up with it anymore. And I think that's an amazing message that every community needs to tell their elected officials. Tinley Park has just become this fantastic learning experience for the rest of Illinois. All of Illinois ought to be watching these people. Everybody around the country ought to be watching these people, because I've never seen a community of people stand up and hold their elected officials accountable with one voice, and so strong and so organized. And, I know these organizers. I know them personally. I've known some of them personally for a really long time, and they've never been involved in anything like this before. Some of them have done lots of volunteering at school for book fairs and book drives and things like that, and others have done charity work. But they've never been involved in anything political ever before. And so to watch them just kind of tackle this without knowing how, and yet be so effective at it and so good at it, I'm just really, really proud of them. And I think they're doing a wonderful thing that all of Illinois ought to sit up and take notice of, because this is the way that you handle corruption in your government.
Yeah, and we need to keep looking at why this was allowed to happen like this at Tinley Park. This reminds me of a story of, like a historic building somewhere that was allowed to rot and decay, or some other treasure that, was not properly taken care of.
Which happens in Tinley Park all the time. 2 buildings that I know of, they've done that too.
They've done that too. But Megan, whenever there's a story like that, how people are just so shocked, and people are like, God, how did that happen? It'd be like hearing that in France they let water drip on the Mona Lisa for 3 years, and now it's ruined and destroyed. And people would be like, I didn't know that was happening. I thought the Mona Lisa was okay. Who would be stupid enough to let water drip on the Mona Lisa for 3 years? And then then we find out David Niemeyer did it, or his French equivalent, Jacques Niemeyer did it.
Jacques.
But my point is that people then suddenly hear that this has been going on for years and years and years. And when you keep digging, every day there's some new revelation. Today we find out, Mike Mertens possibly wasn't even living in Tinley Park and should have been. Now is racing out the door. We find out all this stuff about David Niemeyer, that he should have never been hired as village manager based on his performance reviews and other jobs. he at the very least needs to be bumped back down to assistant village manager, because he doesn't seem.
Someone told Michael Glotz, the excavator, that the village only spoke with one person at the village of Oakbrook about Niemeyer's background. And apparently they never got these letters of reprimand. They never asked for them. So
that's a basic thing you should ask for the personnel file, including all letters of recommend. This is an important position, a very highly paid position.
Right, and it's I would imagine that it's a very sought after position, and that there are many qualified candidates. How did this guy get this job when he has letters of reprimand from more than one village?
And how did he get to keep the job too? Once he's there and he's hired, and people can clearly see, so I don't think that trustees should be let off the hook.
No, and I can't believe that there were never any complaints about Amy, by the way, because the way that people are coming out to tell their horror stories about how she treated them and wouldn't let them open businesses and shut down their projects, I can't believe that no one ever complained about Amy Connolly. And if someone did complain, and if several people did complain about her, well then why wasn't he questioned about what was he allowing this woman to do?
And Megan, this is important. So in terms of this Amy Connolly, people were afraid, is from what I have been hearing. People were afraid for years and years to say anything, because she was the only person who anyone could deal with. If she didn't like you for whatever reason, she would punish you by not letting any of your projects go through, or wouldn't let it go to the next step. And people just in general in Tinley Park, businesses, even now they're still kind of afraid. Like, people will say stuff to us off the record, but they don't want to come on camera. They don't want to speak directly because they are afraid of the village punishing them for speaking out.
Yeah, there's been contractors, that I've talked to off the record who will not come forward, even though they feel that they've been wronged by Tinley Park, because they're afraid that the projects they have going now will get shut down, or that they won't ever be able to work in Tinley Park again. So it's very, very difficult to get people to speak out about it. However, this is a very common story. I have heard from more than one contractor of big developments who have been shut down by Amy, but they will not go on the record about it because they're terrified of not being able to work in Tinley Park anymore. Now, is that the way that America is supposed to work?
No, and again, it's back to the Soviet Union analogy that we talked about earlier, where how the media has become this puppet propagandist for the regime, for the local governments. And that's like the Soviet Union. And then this stuff is very Soviet Union too, that anyone who is making noise or complaining about the way the government is operating, they will be punished. That's how people feel about Tinley Park. And that is not how it should be. And, Megan, I think that the citizens didn't know that this has been going on for all this time. They didn't know that this David Niemeyer was doing this, or Mayor Seaman was doing this, or Amy Connolly.
No, nobody knew. Nobody knew.
Nobody knew. And now that they do know, the question is, what is to be done about it? And of course,
the contractors who did know, because they were the ones dealing with it, well, they couldn't say anything about it because, they're just going to get more of their projects turned down, or they won't get the permits they need when they need permits. So, of course, they weren't going to come forward.
And now there needs to be some kind of protection for people to come forward and to tell their horror stories and to put that all out there. Because, Megan, here's something else too, that Mayor Seaman, I saw him write on Facebook, or he responded to someone. He saw the interview you did with Gabriel Garcia, the architect, talking about how Amy, basically wouldn't let him work in the town. And the mayor claimed he didn't know anything about that, but he was disgusted by it. Well, at some point, when are people going to stop letting the mayor get away with saying he didn't know? And shouldn't the question be, well, shouldn't he have known? And
he said he'd never heard of Gabriel before. And I'm like, yeah, because Amy didn't let him do any work in the village. So why would you have heard of him? And, the idea, it sounded like he was saying he didn't believe the story, really. He's got a lot of nerve.
Well, this sounds like a pretty typical story. And just looking at regular people who wanted to do a fence or wanted to do whatever, I've been hearing horror stories of other people who have said, well, if Amy didn't like this or Amy didn't like that, then you couldn't have whatever. But the power should not be vested just in this woman, Amy Connolly, to do whatever she pleases and treat the town like it's her little dollhouse.
No, absolutely. Absolutely not. She should not be given that that ability. And the fact that Mayor Seaman is seemingly nonchalant about what Gabriel Garcia had to say about his experience with Amy Connolly in the village is very upsetting. He should reach out to him. He really should. He ought to reach out to Gabriel Garcia instead of saying, oh, I never heard of him. Well, call him, because you know where he works. So call him and find out from him. What is his story? Did that really happen? Mayor Seaman ought to be interested in that, because that man is an architect who has developers who work with him who wanted to bring businesses onto Oak Park Avenue, and he was stopped. So why isn't Mayor Seaman on the phone with Gabriel Garcia right now, begging for his, apologizing to him?
Exactly, apologizing and saying, now that I know that this has been a problem and she was doing this to you, Amy is on administrative leave until we figure out how, she could be terminated. I don't know why they just don't fire her today, because it looks like there is enough cause for her to be fired today. But, it appears that that's not how things are done in Tinley Park, because someone else was fired a few years ago and she got a $93,000 golden parachute. She was a 911 supervisor. So
that story. Oh.
It's likely that Amy will get some kind of a golden parachute and be shunted off somewhere else. And it appears these local governments aren't smart enough to ever look into why are these people not staying in a job for longer, or why are these people leaving these jobs? Like this David Niemeyer, he just goes from place to place and stays a little time and screws stuff up and then goes somewhere else. But it seems that these local governments don't really do a good diligence of looking into these people, does it?
No, it does not.
I wonder who the mayor is going to pick to replace Bernie Brady on the board of trustees.
That's another very interesting development. Okay, right? So he gets to appoint someone to the board. He's done a pretty crappy job of doing that so far. He appointed Brady and Grady. I believe Grady was an appointment. I don't know if it was Seaman that appointed him or if it was Zabrocki, but he was appointed. That's, I hesitate to say that he'll do the right thing. I don't think he will. I think what he should be doing is appointing someone, maybe from the Citizens Committee, someone who has already been involved in trying to stop this nonsense. But I doubt that he will. I think that he'll probably go with another one of Zabrocki's old cronies. What do you think?
I'm hoping that he has enough sense to appoint someone decent. I'm just going to say who I think would be excellent. I think they need to appoint Matt Coughlin. Matt Coughlin is excellent, and I think that he should be appointed to be the new trustee. That's what I think. But if not him, someone else who has taken an interest. That's what I want. I want someone who is taking an interest in things. Mm-hmm. We need to find someone who has an intellectual curiosity in the bad things that have been going on in that town. Because the people who are on the board right now, it doesn't seem like they really care very much. This Bernie Brady didn't have the decency to even listen half the time at these board meetings. It looked like he was bored out of his mind or unable to even comprehend what was going on around him. One of those two things, slumped in the chair like a toad. They need to find someone who will pay attention during board meetings, someone who will hear what the people are saying and, then think, gosh, we need to look into this, and then actually do it. That's what you need. Mm-hmm. You don't need another toad.
I agree. I mean, but I just don't have a lot of faith in Seaman being able to do that. I don't have a lot of faith in him actually making the right choice. The guy doesn't seem to make good choices.
He doesn't. But I'm really hoping that TJ Grady, that he is the next one out the door, that he sees that his buddy Bernie Brady has left. So Brady and Grady, they need to leave the building together. Like Elvis Presley. Elvis has left the building. Brady and Grady need to leave the building together like a peanut butter and banana sandwich right out the door. They do.
Yeah. I mean, it would be nice. The resignations, though, I think are going to start coming faster and closer together. I hope. Um, I mean, I think maybe this is just the first one of many to come. What do you think?
Well, why do you think the resignations are coming? That's what's interesting. And I have to believe that it's because that of the lawsuit. The fact that a
Yeah,
judge.
a lawsuit. They don't want to be liable. One, and although they still would be, even if they resigned, that's not going to change anything because they'll still be named in the lawsuit. Brady's not going to get out of that just by resigning his job because whoever was there when it happened is responsible. Um, but I just think that the ones who let's just hope. Let me just say, I have a message for the good board members who are there, like Michael Pinito, who I know is under a lot of stress. And it can be a soul crushing sort of thing to be involved in when you're under a lot of scrutiny and the other board members are shutting him out, and it's tough. The good board members need to stick it out because it's always the bad ones that hang on, and the good ones get sick and tired of dealing with it and they just give up. And it seems like it's not worth it, but it's worth it to hang in there. And I just hope Michael Pinito and even Vandenberg and the other one, Yonkers, I hope they hang in there. They've been voting the right way. And you need people to vote the right way who are listening to people, who are willing to listen to the constituents to stay there and stick it out. So if there are more resignations coming, it better not be from those three.
And Megan, I don't understand these people. When you're a good person and you're on the board and you know that you have the power to do good things, I don't understand. We saw this at the Orland Park Public Library as well, where there was a good woman named Kathy Liebert and there was a good woman named Julianne Craig. And they were the only two good people on a board full of horrible people. And yet Kathy and Julie a lot of times would miss meetings and wouldn't show up, or if they were there, they would just be quiet and they'd let the terrible people talk. But the good people have just as much right to a voice as the bad ones do. But for some reason, these good people feel that they have to be quiet and just let the bad guys win. And in Tinley Park, the bad guys are like TJ Grady. So they let him speak, or they let Brian Maher speak. They let Mayor Seaman speak. But the good ones don't do a lot of talking, and I never understand that. The good ones should be telling the bad ones to shut up and sit down. But unfortunately, the other way is what seems to happen, and I just don't get it.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. It seems that most of the time the good ones get bullied out, and so we really need to keep encouraging the good board members to stick it out, to hang in there, because I agree with the man who came to speak at one of the meetings. He was a former trustee. I don't remember his name now, but he was a former trustee, and he came and he said, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't throw out this whole board. You won't like what happens when that if you do that. There is something to be said about some people who've been here and know how things work. So just get rid of the bad ones. Don't throw them all out, because then you're going to be in trouble. So I see his point, and I just hope that they can stick it out. I really do.
Well, what's interesting is, so next year, you see people with buttons that say 4417. That stands for April 4th of 2017, so just a little over a year from now. So the seat that was occupied by Bernie Brady, whoever's going to be appointed to replace him, that seat is up for election. TJ Grady, he's up for election. Brian Maher is up for election. Mayor David Seaman is up for election. And that clerk, Patrick Ray, he's up for election too. So on 4417, there's a chance that all of these people will get voted out of office.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they should. I don't think there's a single one of them that deserves to be there. That Patrick Ray, I have to give him credit. He has a fantastic voice. I don't know if he's ever done radio. He should do radio shows. So he reminds me of like the Lake Wobegon days. Remember that? The Garrison Keillor?
Yeah, Garrison Keillor.
He was, he always has something interesting to say, and he likes to talk about the history of the town. That's wonderful.
Calaboose.
Yeah, send people to the calaboose. So he taught everyone a new word, and that's lovely. However, this man, as the clerk, has been in charge of where the meetings have been held for these last 2 months, And he has fumbled and bumbled and violated the Open Meetings Act almost every time by not having rooms that have enough space for people. Or in the case of this last meeting on March 22nd, apparently booking the room, but it had to close at a certain time, but there wasn't enough time for public comment. This nonsense of constant Open Meetings Act violations at every single meeting, that seems to be his fault, as well as the fault of Thomas Melody from Kleinthorpe Jenkins, and that can't be allowed. So I think there needs to be a new clerk too, because if you can't manage to have meetings without Open Meetings Act violations based on not having a big enough room or all these other issues, then you're not doing your job, Patrick Ray.
Well, before we run out of time, because we're wrapping it up here, what else would you like to go over before we're done here?
Well, I think it would be interesting to just make sure that people stay interested and that people, there's another board meeting coming up on April 5th. I hope that people come to the April 5th meeting and ask questions. They need to ask why the hell David Niedermeyer isn't up on the chopping block and he's not resigning yet or being terminated yet, because he certainly needs to go. I think people need to confront TJ Grady and say, the wrong board member resigned. Bernie Brady was just kind of rude to people and didn't pay attention really, and that was offensive. But TJ Grady, Megan, oh my gosh, we could talk for an hour about him saying that it's burdensome for the public to be interested in these meetings. And it's burdensome for him to have to listen to the public. And there he sits with his mouth red, clicking at his cheeks or chewing on his tongue and tapping his feet. He hates being there, hates having to listen to the public. That guy needs to go.
Yeah, that was offensive.
Oh, beyond offensive.
Yeah.
I think that Mayor Seaman needs to resign too, because all of this nonsense has happened under his watch. I don't know what the mechanism would be for a new mayor, but Mayor Seaman needs to go. David Niedermeyer needs to go. Amy Connolly needs to finally be terminated, or if she had any decency and dignity, she would just resign. And TJ Grady needs to resign. That's my opinion.
I agree with you. So we will catch up with more of this as it becomes available.
Megan, they all need to resign and spend more time with their attorneys. That's what they need to do.
Yes, they should all be honest and say, I'm resigning to go spend more time with my attorney, because we know it's because they want to spend more time with family.
Right.
But that's all we have time for today. We will keep you updated as when news happens. Thanks for listening, and have a very blessed day.